They tossed him into the cold crystal chamber like a bag of bones, his wrists still bound with plasma thread, his body cracked from days of interrogation. And as the echo of the steel door ceiling behind him faded, Sergeant Cale Riven didn't lift his head, didn't care until he heard it. A voice, calm and cold, like velvet made of frost, say, "You're the first human to be brought before me alive." And when he looked up through blood-blurred eyes, he saw her tall, motionless, wrapped in flowing black and silver armor that shimmered like oil on water, her face hidden behind an intricate, ancient war mask shaped like a tearless goddess, her presence suffocating but somehow sad. And though the other prisoners whispered of her like a ghost, like a prophecy that watched but never acted, Cale didn't kneel, didn't bow, didn't flinch. Instead, he coughed, spat blood on the polished floor, and muttered, "Nice helmet. What are you hiding under there?" And for the first time in 1,000 years, the chamber shuddered, as if the walls themselves were stunned. And the princess stepped closer, her guards frozen, unsure if they should execute him on the spot, but her voice stopped them. "Leave us," she ordered, and they obeyed, because no one disobeyed the masked one. And then she stood before Cale, tilting her head slowly, and said, "No one speaks to me like that." He smiled bitterly and said, "Then maybe you need better company." And her fingers twitched, not in rage, but in curiosity, because for the first time, she couldn't read him. His mind was fogged, fractured, unreadable to her psychic senses, and it scared her, thrilled her, made her question the rules etched into her bones. And when he stood, weak but defiant, and stepped closer than any being had ever dared, the mask reacted, cracking just slightly at the cheek, a hairline, fracture forming where none had ever dared form before. She didn't step back. She whispered, "You should be dead." And Cale replied, "Yeah. Well, maybe you should try living." The crack in her mask should have triggered the ancestral defense protocol instant, neural purge of the intruder, but it didn't. And Cale Riven knew nothing about ancient Velari laws, but he knew how people looked when they were about to fall, and the princess, whoever she truly was beneath that mask of authority and myth, looked like someone who had been holding her breath for centuries, and now for some reason was exhaling for the very first time, even if that breath was poison. She stood frozen, her voice a whisper, barely holding itself together. "No one has ever defied the mask and lived," to which Cale muttered, "Maybe that's the problem." And then, as if daring fate, he took one step closer, one heartbeat too far, and the lights flickered. The chamber's psychic matrix throbbed like a wounded thing, and she raised her hand not in warning, but in uncertainty, her fingers trembling as if resisting a command rooted in her bloodline. And Cale, raw and aching, dared to reach out, not in dominance, not in seduction, but in something almost too human, compassion. But before their hands could meet, the doors slammed open, guards rushing in with shock, rifles primed, and war priests chanting emergency code. And the princess did something unthinkable. She shielded Cale with her own body, spreading her cloaked wings in front of him as her voice roared, "Stand down!" And the guards hesitated, because they had never seen her move with emotion, had never heard her voice crack. And in that pause, a decision took root across the empire, because the AI core monitoring her chamber flagged the event as a Class X anomaly, a royal faltering, a potential bond initiation outside sanctioned protocol. And at the highest tier of Velari command, alarms began to rise, not just that a human had breached the mask, but that the princess had let him end from orbit. A silent vote was cast by the high ascendants. She was now tainted, a veritable, and Cale Riven became the first human in recorded history to be marked not as prisoner, but as a threat to the purity of the crown. Yet none of that mattered to Cale, who sat in a new cell across from her chamber, now guarded by twice the sentries, watching the light flicker behind her mask, knowing something had changed forever. And though neither of them spoke again that night, the silence between them buzzed like a storm about to break. And when morning came, and she visited him again. Without escort, she whispered 4 words through the mask's faint crack. I want to know. ***. No one in the Velari Empire had ever seen the princess's face, not her generals, not her royal advisors, not even her father the emperor after her birth, for the mask was not mere ornament or tradition. It was a containment system, forged from cyan-infused obsidian mind from the core of a dying sun, bonded to her nervous system at age 7 when the oracles saw the prophecy etched in her DNA. If she ever looks upon another being with unveiled truth, the crown mind will fracture, and so the mask had stayed, not to hide her, but to protect everyone else. Because her face was a mirror not of light, but of soul, and when seen by an unbonded mind, it could overload the viewer's reality. Them, not just her, but themselves, the parts they hide, the truths they bury, the futures they fear in. When Kale Riven, still defiant and painfully human, stepped into her chamber again, eyes bloodshot, arms still scarred, he said, "You asked me what I saw yesterday. I saw someone who looked just as trapped as me," and she paused, heart spasming beneath layers of protocol. Because no one had ever asked her how she felt, they only asked how she ruled, how she obeyed, how she served the Empire. And Kale, reckless and unfiltered, sat down in front of her throne without permission, like someone speaking to an equal, and said, "Tell me why you wear it." And the mask flickered again, a new fracture crawling up the jawline like a living vine, and she whispered, "Because if I show you, you won't survive." But Kale only shrugged and replied, "That's the first real thing you've said to me. Guess I'm already halfway dead anyway." And in that moment, something ancient inside her trembled, and the mask, responding not to command, but to emotional, locked one latch, just one. A micro shift in the temple line that revealed the curve of her cheek, glowing faintly with impossible patterns that shimmered like stars seen through tears. And Kale didn't flinch, didn't gasp, just looked at her and whispered, "You're not terrifying. You're beautiful." And though those words were small, they cracked the walls inside her mind, letting in a flood of feelings she'd been trained to suppress: doubt, longing, desire, fear. And the mask screamed in protest, vibrating in pain, for it could feel its control slipping. And far above, in the high-orbit citadel, the Crown Mind AI flashed red across its living surface, issuing a single order: initiate retrieval protocol. The human must be erased. It happened without ceremony, without horns or war chants, just silence. Then a hum in the walls, a whisper in the vents, a flicker in the light matrix that made the princess's pulse freeze in her throat, because she recognized the rhythm. Royal Black Protocol, a kill order, so absolute it bypassed her own authority, triggered only when a crown bearer was deemed compromised beyond recovery. And Kale, sitting against the wall of his cell, tracing a mark in the dust with his fingers, didn't see it coming until the air itself shimmered and 3 figures slipped from the shadow stall, faceless, draped in reflective veils, known only as the Silent Ones. Assassins grown in the genetic wombs beneath the Emperor's personal chamber. Minds wiped clean except for one truth: protect the purity of the line. And their orders were clear: kill the human, extract the princess, purge her mind. And in the moments before impact, the chamber exploded into kinetic chaos. Kale diving for cover with reflexes, dulled by malnutrition, but sharpened by war, while the princess screamed, not with fear, but with fury, because she realized in that split second that the Empire had never seen her as their future, only as a tool in a cage. And so she unlocked the second latch of her mask, even as her own bloodstream rebelled against the psychic overflow, and the air tore open like a scar, flooding the room with light and memory. Her face unveiled in full, for the first time in living history, a thing of terrifying beauty, not in the way of perfection, but in the way it made the mind see itself. And the first assassin who looked at her collapsed to the ground, twitching, muttering its own forgotten name for the first time since its birth. And Kale, though his nose bled and his ears rang from the exposure, looked back at her and smiled, whispering, "I'm still here." And that smile broke her completely, because it meant he chose her not out of duty, not out of programming, but freely. And so she grabbed him, hand to chest, and initiated the bond pulse, an ancient rite that fused a fragment of her energy into his cells, marking him as untouchable. And when the remaining assassins tried to move, the air around Kale cracked with golden fire, and they fell without a scream, and, just like that, the chamber went still, and the war began, because the Crown Mind knew she had chosen the human, and Velari tradition dictated only one response: annihilation. And so from orbit, the skies lit with crimson commands. Fleets turned toward Earth, and the princess whispered, "We have to run, now." And Kale asked only one question, as alarms roared across the citadel. "Will I ever see your face again?" And she said, "You'll see more than that, if we survive." The escape was madness. Alarms screaming through the royal citadel, psionic blast doors crashing shut behind them, corridors reshaping themselves in real time to trap the fugitives. While Kale sprinted beside the princess, whose face was now half exposed, luminous with psychic charge and veined with pain from resisting her blood's ancient programming. And though she stumbled from the strain of keeping the third mask latch sealed, she never stopped moving, dragging Kale through bio-coded gates that only opened because she willed them to, until they reached the hangar, where she overrode a warship's AI with a blood-marked touch and launched them into orbit under a storm of plasma fire. And behind them, the citadel imploded section by section, not from bombs, but from the Crown Mind's own internal rupture. Because her act of bonding with a human was not just rebellion, it was prophetic violation, the fulfillment of a long-hidden subcode in the ancient Velari archives that warned, if the bearer of the unmasked light ever bonds outside the circle, the crown shall bleed, and the stars will fracture. And now the stars were doing exactly that. As factions inside the empire began to split, some horrified that a royal would betray her genetic duty, others secretly relieved, inspired, awakened by the truth she had revealed. And aboard the stolen cruiser, Kale watched as the princess collapsed into the co-pilot seat, trembling, the final lock of her mask glowing hot but still sealed. And he asked softly, "If I see your full face, what happens to me?" And she looked at him, eyes luminous with grief and longing, and said, "You won't survive it, unless you love me completely." And silence filled the cabin like gravity. As Kale stared at her, the woman who should have been a god but looked like someone just trying to be free, and he whispered, "Then show me everything. Let me earn it." But before she could speak, a signal pierced their nav system, a transmission from an old rebel frequency, long thought wiped from the galaxy, containing coordinates to a hidden Velari moon where those who defied the crown had once gathered. And Kale knew instantly they weren't alone in this fight, and so they set course through warm space, knowing assassins, drones, and fleets would follow. But this time with a purpose: to unite the broken and the silenced, to uncover the origin of the Crown Mind's tyranny, and to unlock the truth buried in her blood, the truth that could end the empire or save it, depending on whether Kale's love could endure what lay beneath the final latch. The moon wasn't on any chart, not even the stolen Velari database, and yet it pulsed in the dark like a heart waiting to beat against, covered in obsidian towers that looked abandoned, yet alive, whispering with psychic echoes of those who had once stood against the throne. It was here, on this forgotten satellite called Ilyr's Grief, that the lost rebels of the Velaritha Maskless, the bonded outcasts, the failed bloodlines had built their last hope, a hidden archive known only as the Vein Spire, a vault of forbidden truth encoded not in words, but in ancestral memory strands. And as Kale and the princess descended in their stolen cruiser, the atmosphere rippled like thought, and the ground seemed to recognize her, causing the black stone beneath her feet to glow faintly, with acceptance and the rebels. Strange and half-merged with tech, emerged from the mist in silence. Their eyes haunted but hopeful, and when they saw the princess unmasked even partially, they dropped to one knee, not in worship, but in shock, because her arrival meant the prophecy had begun, the one that spoke of the bound spark, the union of alien royalty and outsider soul that would either cleanse the crown mind's corruption or fracture the stars into chaos. And within the vein spire, Kale was granted access to the Neurotrace, a machine older than Earth's moon, which allowed him to experience the encoded memories of ancient Velari rulers, and what he saw shattered him, a truth buried for millennia, that the Velari had once been human. Long ago, diverged by genetic war, evolved by psychic intervention, their masks originally designed not to conceal power, but to protect their descendants from the trauma of their own past. And the princess, stunned by the shared vision, realized why she couldn't read Kale's mind, because his blood still held the original code, the emotional core the Velari had long since bred out. And in that moment, Kale understood he wasn't an accident, not just some random soldier. He was the last piece of a forgotten design, the final trigger of a cycle set in motion eons ago by Velari ancestors who feared what they had become. And now the choice was clear: bond fully, unleash the final mask, and let the full truth flood the galaxy, or run and let war consume everything. And as Velari fell into Kale's arms in the archive chamber, her voice breaking, she whispered, "If I show you everything, I may not survive it, but if I don't, no one will." And Kale, heart racing, wiped the tears from her unmasked cheek and said, "Then we fall together, or we rise, or we rise."